Okay, great. So welcome for those of you who have not been to one of our webinars before. My name is Michele Regan. I'm the Managing Director at Inspired Instruction. Super excited to be here with you. We do these monthly webinars on topics that we feel are really timely and relevant to the field. So please share with your colleagues. Like I said, a recording will be available. You can just go onto our website afterwards, actually give us a day, and then you can access the recording. We're also going to have some materials that go along with the session today. So if you're interested in receiving those materials afterwards, we're going to have a survey that you'll fill out at the end, and you can just indicate that you want to receive the materials afterwards. Okay, so today our topic is instructional leadership, providing targeted support. So I'm going to ask any of you who are on screen, if you're not on screen and you want to share yourself, please feel free or unmute. But how many of you feel like instructional leadership in your role is one of the top 3 things you get to do? So with everything that's going on in terms of eating up your time in a school building, if you want to hold up a thumbs up, yes, I get to spend my time being an instruction leader, or never get to spend the time, or sometimes, but it's inconsistent. So we'll see from our group here, we have some people that are off screen. So feel free to put in chat if you like. I'm going to give you a second. Okay. And the reason why I ask that question is so frequently when we go into buildings, okay, we have a couple of people that said it's a mix sometimes. That's really what I hear. So I hear when I go into buildings, when I get a chance to meet with administrators, we're always hearing like, this is our calling. This is what we want to do. We want to be able to provide that instructional leadership to our teachers, but it often falls to the bottom of the list of things to do. And so thank you for sharing that it's happening, but it's happening sometimes. And so today what we hope to do is try to think about it in ways that can be, that maybe don't require necessarily as much time as you think in terms of like a full-blown evaluation, but also we can kind of tighten up what it means to give meaningful feedback, how we can help teachers understand criteria for success. So what does success look like? And how can we turn that feedback into some action, right? We want to make sure that when we are walking out of a classroom, that teachers always have something to action. Because believe me, the more you see them, and I think a lot of us can speak from experience, the more you see them, the more comfortable they're going to be with you doing those pop-ins, those walkthroughs, those observations. But we want them to be effective, even if they're just 5 minutes. Okay, let me take a moment to let in some more guests here. Okay, super. So here's our goals for today. This is what we hope to achieve. Okay, so I want to think about, or have you think about, center the next 30 minutes that we spend together in your role as instructional leader. So yes, you have a million other tasks that you might be doing all day, but we just want to think about right now how we can maximize that time as an instructional leader. So if you have a pen and paper nearby, even if it's a Post-it, I'm going to ask some little reflection questions so you can think about, and this can guide the rest of our work together today. Okay. So we're going to look at some scenarios. Feel free to put your answers in the chat or to unmute, but I want you to think about each of these scenarios. And as your role in instructional leader, how would you feel about this? If you entered into the room, would you have a good feeling? Would you be, a little not so sure what's happening here? What's your gut reaction to these scenarios? So here's the first. Feel free to add to chat or unmute. Anyone have a reaction? Good, not so great. What's your thoughts here? So in chat, let's check it out.
There are a lot of things going on here. I mean, she's asking whether the students understand it, but you don't know if everybody gave them the thumbs up. And just because they understood it doesn't mean that they did it correctly. I think I would have wanted her to model the answer, or maybe asked one of the students who had the thumbs up to explain how they got their answer before assigning problems. I also don't like teachers just giving blanket problems to the whole class, because problem sets should be individualized by student ability. So there's a lot of things wrong with this one.
Okay, before I comment on all of those great points, anybody want to share, add on to what Ms. Clark shared?
Yeah, if I could, I agree 100%. And where is the genuine assessment of what it is that they're actually doing? And if we're not walking around and looking at what the students are doing, we can't really see where maybe they have made an error or what step of the problem they actually need help in. And when you do that whole blanket, like give me a thumbs up if you understand, you run the risk of a student just giving a thumbs up because they don't want to be one of the kids giving a thumbs down. So you're kind of, putting them on the spot, so to speak. If you want to avoid something like this, if like you're giving a problem, you could do like, if it wants to be like a quick assessment or even like an exit ticket or an entrance ticket to figure out how you're going to differentiate your groups later, you can do like a quizzes, you can do a plickers, you can do something so the kids could stay a little bit more anonymous, while getting maybe a more true representation of if they get the correct answer, even though those things still don't show you, where their understanding of the problem actually is.
So I
Okay.
need more contextualization for this, actually. So for me, if there's a ritual of thumbs up in the classroom, then the beginning part for me could be totally fine. But I don't know from this. Right. So if I was the principal or whatever, I could walk in. If it was in my school, I might know that this is a ritual in the classroom. And so it's totally fine because the kids have been trained how to use it. And so I wouldn't have such a big problem with that. It depends on the classroom, the teacher, the whatever. The bottom part, while I think that individualized problem sets are really useful and absolutely should be used, I also think there's a value in everybody doing the same thing. Because a practice in my school had always been that the teacher would say, have 3 different opportunities for kids to display their work. Usually they did it with overheads, right? And so then they'd have an opportunity to see 3 different ways that a problem could be solved. It was also a good strategy. So again, context is everything.
So Susan raises a good point, and the reason why we're doing these little scenarios is to help us sharpen our lens. And one of the first things that we need to do is know our teachers, right? And so Susan, that's a really good point. And so if we know this is a ritual, that would indicate one direction this was going in, right? But I think what is raised, and Ms. Clark raised it, Susan raised it, Christina raised it, this leads us to questions. We have questions about this. And I think any good instructional leadership starts with questions. So when you're walking into a room, and I always have my little Post-its or what have you near me, I think Post-its are the best because then you can leave something behind, is you can jot down questions you have. So literally you might be in there. And how many times have you gone in and done an observation that wasn't the whole class, period? Inevitably, you're going to miss some critical piece, right? So questioning of the teacher is a super, super useful tool in instructional leadership. All right, let's keep going. Just so we can kind of have a similar lens with through which we are looking. What do we think about this one? Anybody want to share, either unmute or in chat? Okay, so counter to the first scenario, in this group, like Christina pointed out, the teacher is moving from group to group. So that can be an awesome practice. Again, we want to make sure that when the teacher is moving from group to group, that the questioning and the feedback is appropriate, right? Okay, so Genevieve shared, she'd be pleased that students are driving the activity and that the teacher is probing. It keeps students more engaged. So there are absolutely a lot of good things about this scenario. But you may also have some questions, right? You might want to know more. You might want to dive deeper. Okay, our last one. Okay. Any thoughts or comments about our third scenario?
I think one of the questions is what kind of class is this? Is
Yeah.
this a lower level class, or are these special education students, or is this an L class? If this is a regular ed class, I probably would have some issues with it.
Okay. Other thoughts, comments?
I'm wondering what happened prior to this. Was there a model of a similar type of diagram? Like, what exactly are they looking at and labeling? I agree with what Ms. Clark had said as well. The teachers, I mean, could you give the students the power if they're taking notes from it? Could you give them like the actual notes
Right,
and have
right.
them work together in a group to kind of determine that and have it be more of a higher level task than just kind of looking and doing.
Right. So again, a lot of questions come to mind that you would raise with this teacher about what happened before, about who the students were. So again, something that we always want to think about as instructional leaders is when we're going into a classroom, you could have the same objective, let's just say in 3 fifth grade science classes, right? And so you're going in thinking, okay, today I'm going to be seeing a lesson on X, but the differences are really going to occur based on who is being taught, who are those groups of students, what are their strengths and needs. To your point, Ms. Clark, are they English language learners? Because it's going to be a different approach. So it matters who the students are. And then as Susan pointed out before, it also matters what the routines and rituals and what this teacher's approach is. And so all of these things mean, like I said earlier, lots of times stopping into these classrooms is what's going to help you become a stronger instructional leader. Now, again, we talked about obstacles and that time is one of them. But again, keep in mind, it's okay and appropriate to stop in for 5 to 10 minutes on a regular basis to sort of get a snapshot. Okay, we're going to talk further about feedback and how different our feedback will look if we're just popping in versus doing a full evaluation. But again, really, really instructive to be in classrooms as frequently as possible in that role of instructional leader. Okay, so you've done your evaluations, you've done your walkthroughs, formal or informal, now what? So some of the things that typically first happens is you start thinking about, well, what teachers jumped out at me as a really strong or an exemplar teacher? And what teachers need immediate support, right? If you're someone that's walking through and doing 5, 6 walkthroughs in a day or over the course of a week, some of these things start coming to mind. And you're also going to start thinking about trends that jumped out at you. So for example, Ms. Clark mentioned before about maybe a lack of differentiation. You might visit 3 classrooms and notice that same trend. Okay, so some of these things are the immediates that are going to jump out at you. And they're immediates that we want to act on, especially those teachers that need more support. But we also want to take a step back and have more of a process about what we do. Okay, so as we go forward, we first have to think about, what is it that we want to see? So I want you to take a minute and jot down on notepad or Post-it, whatever you have nearby. And I know this could be a long, extensive list, so I'm not asking for that. I'm asking for a quick stop and jot. When you walk into a classroom or another learning space, what do you expect to see? And you can just kind of, what are the top things that come to mind? So I'm going to give you a moment to do that. And this is for you, so we don't have to share them. Okay. Everybody have 1, 2, maybe 3 things jotted down? Okay. All right. So I'm going to pop over to chat. Okay. So when we think about what it is that we want to see, a couple of things usually happen. So we have our own personal, I'm going to call it mission statement, right? We have our own personal beliefs about what education is and what we should see. And those are really important. They're going to color every walkthrough you do. But we also have to align that with what is it that the school is expecting of their teachers. So what evaluation tool do you use? What are the tenets of good instruction according to your mission statement, your school district mission statement, your curriculum and instruction department? So what are those things that have been communicated to teachers? Okay, and we want to make sure those two things are aligned. And sometimes they come into contrast with each other or conflict with each other. And I can give you an example. One of the things that we often hear when we go in and do school visits, when we're doing coaching, is our curriculum has such a fast pace. You know, the district curriculum expects us to be moving at this high pace, and we want to make sure we're digging in and that real learning is happening. So sometimes there can be a disconnect or a conflict between you know, our personal beliefs or our district curriculum. So we want to make sure that as an instructional leader that we have connected with our team, with our higher ups to make sure we're all in alignment. We certainly don't want Miss Clark going into a room and Miss Lewis going into a room from the same school and thinking different things. Right? We sort of have to align our expectations and then norm our lens. So that means we need to have opportunities to discuss and share. Okay. And I know that again is a time issue, but it's super important because if teachers don't know what to expect, the feedback they receive is probably not going to be received in the way that you want it to be received. Anyone have any examples of that, or they want to share a situation that may reflect on this idea of aligning our lens of what we expect to see?
I expect to see active, engaging learning, not the teacher standing there just teaching and trying to get kids to talk, but actually physically engaged learning.
Okay, so something like that, and everybody can respond to this if you like. Would you know it when you see it? As soon as you walk in, would you know it when you see it?
Yes.
Yes. That's one of those examples where I know it when I see it. And we probably don't need to be doing a lot of questioning, right? Because we know when we see good student engagement. That is also most likely something that when you're aligning with your peers who are also doing observations, most likely everybody could be in agreement with what it looks like. Okay, but that's the kind of discussion you want to have with your instructional leadership team is, do we all know what it looks like when we see it, whatever it is? Okay, some people call that instructional rounds, but it's where 2 or more people would either go together, observe together, or do separate observations and debrief afterwards to make sure we're all in alignment. Any other thoughts or examples of that type of thing where you know it when you see it versus I'm really having to do some digging and some questioning?
I think having very clear routines and procedures in place so that that learning can happen as far as the organization of the actual classroom and the location of resources. And you can see it kind of run itself so that that active learning can happen without the need to stop and interrupt for like management type things. So like very clear routines and procedures established at the get-go so that the good stuff can happen
So the
afterward.
good stuff can happen. Right. So that's another good example that most likely there wouldn't have to be a lot of discussion between the admin team about what it looks like, because you can see it. Now that we know what it looks like, we have to actually think about how we communicate those things to our teachers. Okay. So the first step is really your team having that discussion. What does best practice look like? What is our evaluation tool? I'm going to use an example today from Danielson, but there are many. There's Marzano and Strong and McRell, and there's so many different tools, and some districts even create their own tools. But we know they boil down to some very specific best practices. So again, ensuring that everybody is aware of what those are is going to make this whole process that much easier. So we broke it down into 3 key areas. The first being communicating with teachers is, what does success look like? So just like we want our students to have criteria for success, we also want our teachers to know what success looks like. Okay, so as Christina mentioned, have they been able to observe another highly effective teacher at what those classroom routines look like? Have they been able to, have they had any professional development or seen good active engagement strategies in action? So those are the kinds of things we want to think about. So a couple of bullet points to hit around this. Sharing the walkthrough tool in advance. Okay, so you can either share with them whatever your evaluation tool is, or sometimes people use an informal walkthrough tool where they might just have a couple of look-fors. Okay, so as Ms. Lewis pointed out, maybe your focus is student engagement. If that was the case, I might have a student engagement look-for document with just 5 little indicators that would tell me that student engagement was happening. Okay, and I would share that with the teacher in advance. If you don't have a specific tool like that, just share the focus area. So today, Ms. Zawacki, when I come into your classroom, I'm going to be looking for student engagement. Or even if you're not telling them, if it's a surprise visit, this quarter, this semester, this month, our focus is blank. And so anytime you see me, I'm going to be looking through my lens of student engagement. Okay, it's important that people feel like they have the power to be successful and that this isn't a gotcha. Okay, we want to make sure that expectations are communicated and they're communicated regularly. So I use the example of a mission statement because I observed this in a school that literally had teachers create a mission statement. It was everywhere. It was not only in the hallways, it was on every agenda for every meeting. It was on the bottom of everybody's email signature. So if we're talking about things like students are actively engaged, critical thinking, student-led classrooms, if that's in your mission statement, everybody should be using that language. Okay.
In my
And then
school,
lastly,
sorry.
go ahead. Somebody had.
I was just going to say that when you're thinking about using those rubrics, it's inter-rater reliability among the administrative staff or the instructional leadership team is all well and good, and that's absolutely important, but it's really great to have inter-rater reliability among your staff too.
Right. So Susan, do you mean that the teachers all have an understanding? Is that what you mean, that we're all
No,
on
I
the
mean the
same
teachers
page?
can use it like with
Oh,
other
okay.
teachers.
Okay, makes total sense. Well, and that, so write this last bullet that I have here about having teachers share the criteria for success. Basically, that means they need to know it and to be able to communicate it and also use it effectively. So that can be done in different ways. It can be done during PLC meetings. It can be done for staff observations, right? I go and I check out somebody else's room so that I can see examples of this. Again, can be 5 minutes, can be a whole period based on coverage time. But I think it's never better than when you can see something in action. So thank you for pointing that out. Okay, so once, just like students, once we get them situated with criteria for success, they know what it looks like. Now we want to know, what do we do once we are in there and we are doing those walkthroughs and we are wanting to support our teachers. So in our planning for that, I'm going to share this tool with you if you're interested. It's really just, and you can see on the top, it's a little bit small. I just cut and paste from Danielson domain 3, which is the instruction domain. So whatever your tool is, okay, you want to take that area that you're looking for and you now want to break it down into the expectation. What do you expect to see? And then some specific best practices. So let's pretend in this scenario, this is a brand new teacher. And you say to the teacher, okay, well, I really need to see a variety of question types. That can go right over a new teacher's head if they have not been trained in some of the different taxonomies, like Bloom's taxonomy, or if they have never received any training or professional development around good questioning. So we really want to give them some specifics, letting them know, okay, you're going to need to create some questions ahead of time that focus on different levels of Bloom's taxonomy. That's just one of many suggestions or best practices you could give them. And then you're going to also have some related resources. So this could be something from the district curriculum. This could be an awesome website. This could be a template that your own instructional leadership team has created. Okay. But the reason why I recommend doing this in advance is, again, we know how busy you are. And if you know what you want to see, this should be pretty straightforward, that as soon as you walk out of that room, that teacher has something to go to, because it's much easier to receive feedback if you are then told what you should be doing. Okay. If someone says to me, all right, well, we really have to talk, we have to debrief about this, there was a lot going on, we got to talk about questioning, that person is left with just a lot of thinking to do and not a lot to kind of grasp onto. And so we want to make sure we have that planned out in advance with some specific strategies and supports. And we're going to talk more about this in a couple minutes. Okay. And then once we've kind of determined what's the area of focus for this particular teacher, we want to make sure that the feedback that we're giving them is meaningful. Okay. It needs to be able to move teacher practice. And the only way that's going to happen is if we give the feedback in a way that it can be received. So I found this ladder of feedback. It was created not necessarily for education, but it applies to education, I think, perfectly. And what I love about this is take this, take a look for a minute at this ladder. And before I tell you what I love about it, does anything jump out at you as why this would be a good practice to follow?
You're not launching with something that could be perceived as negative, which could put someone on the defense, which completely just goes against what the whole goal of the entire thing is. If it's to improve instructional practice, just like with your students, you're going to want to start off disarming them and creating a sense of trust and a relationship by asking them questions to get them involved in the process, and then give them a compliment, highlight the positives before launching into something that, could be, teachers teach with their entire heart. So they're doing something from the heart. And so when you go in with a suggestion or you have a concern, they feel that like a lot. So you want to, just be kind and careful with the way you structure it's a critique. It's not supposed to be something negative.
And I love that you said that they feel that, because I think that is very, very true. Most of us are not receiving feedback intellectually. We're receiving feedback emotionally. And even if your suggestion is the best suggestion, and and I've had this happen to me as a PD provider, I might know that this suggestion is going to be such an easy tweak for them, and they're going to be able to improve this practice right away. If I haven't done step 1 and step 2, they're not going to receive it the way I want them to. So I love that step 1 is clarify. And so all of you earlier, when you looked at your scenarios, that was the first thing you did. So I love that. You all had questions. Okay, so that's how we literally want to start, even written feedback. So even when you are giving written feedback, it does not hurt to put in writing what questions you have. Okay, because again, in writing, they're really going to go to that. What is she saying? What is she saying? They're going to, you know, scan it quickly, and that tells somebody you actually care about the answer, right? You care about, as Christina said, their participation in this. Okay, so we want to use a practice. You might have a specific feedback tool that you've used, but just consider on, and I love that they call it clarify and value. We're going to comment on not just a throwaway, like I like your anchor charts, right? Sometimes it's hard to find something positive, but I love that they call it value. So what is the value that this thing that you're going to call out? What is the value that it, or what is, how does it serve students? So instead of saying something like, I noticed you have a lot of anchor charts, great job, you could say something like, I noticed students are really able to be independent learners because you have anchor charts that they can access. Right, go ahead, Susan.
To add to that, just the frame is so important, right? So when you clarify, the teacher, you and the teacher, then the teacher understands you're on their team because you've just created a common understanding of what you just witnessed, right? And so it's lovely to be able to take the anchor charts. Oh, look how well you do with these anchor charts. How could we use that to support this other thing that I see? And this is such a great strategy. What could you do that with this? It's a lovely way to use a strength to address a thing that is maybe not so nice.
Well, and that's what you just said made me think of what we do with students in that way, is make those connections for them so they don't feel like they're disparate things that you're saying to them. You're acknowledging the strengths and then pulling that into how we can lift something else.
We
Any
always
other
thought
thoughts
of
or comments? Go ahead, Susan.
this kind of PD as what you needed to do it for teachers. You needed to treat them in PD like the students, because they just had a crazy day. They don't want to really think. And so the more you can provide the scaffolding for them, the better they do in PD, and the more likely you are to, to have impact in achievement.
That's a good point. Okay, so we see that our feedback needs to be thoughtful and meaningful and directly connected. On that slide before where I had those strategies and those supports directly connected to that. So when we are making suggestions, we're not going to just suggest, hey, you should be doing this, but we want to give them the tools, the scaffolding, the support to actually take those steps. Okay, so I'm going to give you an example of some feedback. And again, this is not bad feedback, but how can we tweak it? So here's an example of what a principal shared with the teacher. Okay, so we want to think about how could we just tweak this or modify this to make it more instructive for teachers, more meaningful. Definitely a little longer. So what's the difference here? What do you like? What are you thinking about?
Well, the revision is much more solution oriented, it's not just calling out the concerns without providing any suggestion as to how to remedy them in an effective way. So the teacher could still be left like wondering, well, what kinds of questions? It might not be that they don't want their students to have discussions, but they might not know how to prompt that well. So providing the suggestion would help.
Okay, great. So it's much more specific. There's strategies embedded. Even the fact that they're saying analyzing, synthesizing, evaluating, that gives the teacher a starting place. Okay, well, where could I start adding that in? It's very specific. Any other thoughts?
It would be great if you could really give them a question from whatever they were teaching at the moment. Like, oh, you were thinking these questions. Next time, maybe you could think about questions like this. And
I love that. Even better is to make it specific to the lesson you observed. Right. So in this case, this is providing them with like a beginning framework. But to your point, what you're saying is if that lesson was about some science phenomena, what examples could you give?
Exactly.
Great. Okay. So now we have feedback. And believe me, I know I'm going quickly in these topics, but I know we have limited time. So we did our pre-planning of our walkthrough. We have some strategies at the ready. We're giving feedback that's meaningful because it first clarifies, it values the teacher's efforts, and then provides suggestions. But I'm going to also share this tool, if you're interested, as a way to turn feedback into action. And so it's called the 5 S's. And you're going to provide that feedback. And I think about this in terms of like an informal walkthrough. It could be used after an observation. It could be used if you're an instructional coach, or if you're just trying to support teachers that maybe are new teachers that need some focus area, some focused time. But you provide the feedback, and then when you sit with the teacher, you do this together. Now you can have some things. I would have this first box, shared vision. I would have my questions already in here. And I'm going to show you, and you're going to get a blank sample of this. But I would have my questions already in here. And then the process is I'm going to take some notes in talking to the person because I want to build our shared vision. I know we want to increase student engagement. Here are some things I thought about that we could talk about today. Okay, so we're going to start with that. But then the solutions, the supports, the schedule, and the sharing, I go in with this blank. And the reason why I do that, you might even have your own separate notebook with some ideas for solutions. But we know that these, the feedback and the suggestions are only going to be received if they were done in dialogue. You have to build the teacher's agency, right? And they have to own their own learning. So when I come and I talk about these 3 questions and then I take some notes, that's when I'm then going to suggest some solutions. I'll probably even start with asking them for suggestions. So, okay, we've talked about some of the obstacles that you're facing, getting students engaged, but you've identified some clear benefits. What solutions might you have? And then you listen to what they have to say, you jot some of those down, and then you're going to add some of these. Okay, you might have 4 solutions that are possible solutions, but then you might even drill down even more and narrow your focus on 1 or 2 of those. Okay, and so you want to be ready with what are some of the supports that you can offer. So in this instance, it's having the teacher visit someone else's classroom to get some room arrangement ideas. I mean, they can do that after school. They can do that on the way in the morning. Okay, but I've identified who's going to set that up. So the teacher is going to own that. Provide a sample of some accountable talk stems. I, as the observer, instructional leader, am going to be responsible for providing that resource. Maybe they want a demo of a Socratic seminar and what that looks like. If you have an instructional coach, maybe you could have that person take responsibility. But even then you want to do the next step, which is to actually schedule these things. Okay, this can be tricky, but if you can't put an actual date, like if March 25th seems like too scary to acknowledge or to put on a piece of paper, maybe you say something like during this semester, and then you're going to have a check-in date, right? So maybe you'll set up a visit this month. I will send you these by the end of the week. We'll set up a demo lesson by the end of this semester. So this isn't to imply that every single thing needs to happen within a week's time. It just means that we need to hold people accountable, and we need to have times, just like we do with SMART goals, right? They need to be timely and measurable. And then lastly, what was the outcome? We want to have this critical piece of sharing out the outcome. So either a debriefing time with yourself or another administrator, sharing outcomes at PLCs, I think are awesome, even if the outcome wasn't spectacular. So I have had teachers, for example, in this particular instance, who never did group work, okay? And they came to the PLC to share the outcome. And the outcome was, I've never had a louder lesson than the day I tried to do group work. So a couple of things happen, right? We acknowledge that the person tried it. We are, super excited to hear more, but we can also let them share some of their fears, and other people can say, oh yeah, me too, right? The first time I ever had my middle schoolers move into groups, it was loud, but learning is messy and it's all good. So we can kind of share, right? And we can also, as whoever's running that PLC, provide some, again, support. It's baby steps, a little shout out, great job. If this piece doesn't happen, if we're not all talking about the outcome, what do you think happens?
Nothing's gonna happen.
Who said that? I love it. Nothing, Miss Clark.
Margarita, it's
Nothing.
Margarita. Nothing's gonna happen. That's what
Nothing's
usually
gonna
happens.
You did a lot of nice writing some things down, but nothing is going to happen. So even sharing those outcomes, which can be perceived as negative or bumpy or what have you, those are all steps in the process, and it has to be a part of it. Any other thoughts or comments about this type of tool or action plan? Have you used something like it? Would it be helpful to you?
I think it's a good idea.
Okay.
I think also with the notes, a teacher can use this as an artifact, especially if they address some of the issues and then they show that they've improved. I think it's a very strong artifact.
Love it. The other thing that I was thinking right now, and I guess I hadn't thought about before, is notice this is one thing they're focusing on, one area. This is not meant to, if you go in and observe a teacher and you're like, there's a lot going on here, I have 5 or 6 things I want to talk to them about, we know that all of those, that's not going to be received. So, obviously it's a Google Doc, it can be made longer, but the intent really is to be concise and to be focused on one area. Okay. Okay. So just some general best practices, and we could have started with this because this is all really critical, but I think the building trust and the getting buy-in, I really think happens at every step of the way. So it happens when you're sharing that criteria for success. It happens when you're giving meaningful feedback. It happens when you are giving those specific strategies that inform an action plan, right? So we can't think that just by saying, being the happy-go-lucky, I'm just popping in kind of administrator, we can't just assume that is going to get the buy-in you want. Okay, it's really every step you take. But I think some of these things lend themselves well. So encouraging a school-wide culture of reflection, that everything we do, even as administrators, we should be thinking out loud and reflective at all times. And I think even when we are wrong, or when we make mistakes, or when we make assumptions, it is still a good practice to be reflective in real time with our teachers. Be transparent. Share what's going to happen on the front end, share why, share the data that it's collected, tell them how it's going to be used. So if you're popping in for your informal walks, some people call them learning walks, let them know this is to provide you with feedback so that you can continue to learn. We have a culture of lifelong learning here in the building. Or if this is your formal observation, here is how the data is used. Okay. You've heard me say this several times. So regular and consistent schedule of visits. You want to increase your visibility. You want to increase the engagement. So if you are someone on that instructional leadership team, you don't only want to be seen during formal observations. Okay. Again, that feedback is going to be less likely to be received if they don't see you engaging in this culture all the time. And lastly, follow up. We have to follow up. We have to be true to that. So I'm going to circle back to that transparent thing. If you put on that 5 S's that you were going to follow up with someone by the end of the month, even if you can't do every single thing that you had hoped, you still want to touch base with them and say, hey, I know you were going to see so-and-so's classroom. I know we didn't get to do the Socratic seminar demo yet, but how are things going? What areas do you need troubleshooting on? Okay, because otherwise, again, we fall back into that trap of nothing really happening and no change is happening. All right, so before everybody gets ready to leave today, we're going to do our own reflection. If you have note paper and pen, think about this for yourself. What are you going to do to ensure that feedback and meaningful feedback is part of your instructional leadership? And what structures and accountability do you already have in place that you can leverage? So are you already doing check-ins and you have to just tweak them now? Or is there already instructional coaching going on in the building that you can bring in to this process? Is there PD that you need to provide? Okay. Just take a moment and jot some things down before we sign off today for your own next steps. Okay. And as you're thinking about what your next steps are, please know that we're here to support you. Our work does not just focus on teachers. We have been engaging in supporting instructional leaders and admin for several years now. We're doing a lot of work with coaching the coaches, supporting leadership, because we do know how critical it is to changing teacher practice. So that's really our focus. When we do professional development, it's not about a one and done. It's really about a long-term ongoing solution. Okay. I am going to just share with you quickly our survey. If you're interested in any of the documents that you saw in today's webinar, please let me know when you fill out the evaluation. There's a section that asks what additional PD might you want. Just jot in there if there's areas that you want to focus on, and if you also want to put in that you would like the materials. Okay, I'll hang out for a couple of minutes. If people have questions, I'm happy to answer, or hang out and just chat about whatever your needs or priorities are. Otherwise, happy holidays to everybody. I hope you have a really restful break. And again, I'll hang out for a couple of minutes, but then we hope to see you back at our January webinar.
Thanks, Michelle.
Of course, thank you.
Have a good one.
Thank you.
Thank you.
You too. Thank you, everybody.
I thought this was really good. I'm
Oh,
definitely
thank
going to
you.
use that form. I'm going to introduce it to my staff.
Oh, excellent.
Tell them
Okay.
that I'm going to use that form for now on, that I'm going to pop in, I'll try and pop into their class once a month
Okay.
and fill that out and ask them to help me become a better supervisor and,
Oh, I love that.
and assist them in, I guess, maybe examining their craft, becoming a better teacher, especially
I
my
love that.
non-tenures. I'm going to definitely do it with my non-tenures.
Okay. I love that. So I will get that over to you.
Yeah, I think
And, I'd
we
love to
actually
hear.
we worked with your school. I mean, we worked
Yes.
with you, but not
Yep.
on coaching, which this was really good. So I liked it. I'm gonna suggest that Mrs. Calabrese follow up.
Okay, perfect. And you know what, Ms. Clark, I would love to hear how it goes.
Yeah,
So if you start using this and you have feedback, love to just hear how it's going, because that's what we want to do these for, is that it's impacting what's happening in the schools.
thank you very much and happy
Okay, have a
holidays.
great day.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye. Have a great day, Ms. Peart. Bye-bye.